At 6 o'clock in the morning on the 9th of April, 1818, the Duchess of Wickham was in the estate office with 2 men and a lease, and she had been there since 41 years, not 60, Helena Carr said. 60 carries us past the Ravensgill sump, and I will not sign a lease that obliges this house to drain a working we cannot pump. 41 years, the rent stepped at the 14th, and a clause that the ventilation furnace is maintained at the lessee's charge, and inspected quarterly by Mr. Headley or his successor. Read that clause back to me, Mr. Ord, because it is the only one I care about. The bank's agent read it back. She listened with her head slightly bent, the way she had listened for 9 years, and then she took the pen and signed Helena Wickham in a small, upright hand, and blotted it, and handed the parchment across the table to the other lessee, the Duke of Denholm, who had ridden 11 miles before dawn to be in that room, as he had done 4 times a year since 1811, and who signed it under her name without reading it, because there had never once in 7 years been a reason to. It was at that moment, with the ink still wet, that the door opened and her husband came in with the Countess of Harlow on his arm. "Helena," said Lucius Carr, 4th Duke of Wickham, "I did not think you would still be at this. It is the Ravensgill renewal. You have known since February." Yes, well, he was 35 and handsome in a way that had been remarked upon since he was 19. And he had the peculiar brightness of a man who has rehearsed something in a carriage. "I would rather have said this elsewhere, but you are always in this room, so it must be this room. Lady Harlow will be keeping the house from Lady Day. You will remove to Aldwych. The carriage can take you this afternoon." There was a silence in the estate office at Wickham, of a very particular kind. Helena Carr was 29 years old. She was the daughter of Sir Marcus Ashe of Newcastle, ironmaster and banker, and she had come to this house in 1809 with £40,000 and her father's guarantee behind every line of credit her husband had drawn since, and the county had never entirely forgiven her for the 40,000, nor for the Newcastle, nor for being cleverer than the man who had married her. She had run Wickham for 9 years. She had drained it, leased it, insured it, and kept it out of Chancery twice. She did not look at Serena Harlow at all. "Mr. Ord," she said, "you have the counterpart. Take it to Newcastle today and do not leave it in this house overnight." She capped the ink. "Mr. Headley is to have his 140 lamps by Whitsun, and the invoice comes to me at Aldwych, not here. Your Grace, and this to Denholm. The quarterly inspection stands whatever else changes. Do not let it lapse. It is the only thing between that colliery and a very bad morning." Then, and only then, she turned to her husband. "I shall want the small carriage and 1 cart," she said. "I am taking my own books and nothing else of yours. You may tell the county whatever version suits you. I shall not be contradicting it." She walked out past the Countess of Harlow without altering her pace, and Serena Harlow, who had waited 9 years for that afternoon and had imagined it a great many times, discovered that it did not feel remotely as she had expected. The Duke of Denholm stood at the table with the lease in his hand and watched her go. He was 38, 9 years older than the woman who had just left the room, and he had a face nobody described as handsome and a pair of forearms marbled blue-black under the skin from a fall of stone in his own workings at 22, which was the sort of thing dukes were not supposed to have, and which he had long since stopped covering at table. He had sat across a table from Helena Carr 4 times a year for 7 years. He had watched her sign, blot, and hand over. He had never once seen her leave a sentence unfinished, and he noticed, the way a man notices a thing he will be unable to stop thinking about for a year and a half, that she had signed the lease first. Wickham was in the newspapers within 9 days, and the county took the view that the Duke had at last done what everybody had privately advised in 1809. and Lady Harlow entertained 41 people to dinner on the 2nd of May and put £900 worth of French paper on the walls of the long drawing room. The bills began arriving in the 3rd week. They did not arrive as a flood. That is the part nobody who tells this story ever gets right. They arrived one at a time, and politely, and there was nothing at all remarkable about the first 4 of them. But the coal factor at Stockton wrote to say that as the Duchess's name no longer appeared on the account, he must trouble his Grace for the £1,100 outstanding, and would take a bill at 60 days if it were endorsed. The corn chandler wrote the same. The saddler wrote the same. Every tradesman between Durham and Ripon had, for 9 years, extended credit to Wickham on the plain understanding, never written anywhere, because such things never are, that the accounts were kept by the Newcastle woman and paid on quarter day to the hour, and that behind the Newcastle woman stood Sir Marcus Ashe. Sir Marcus Ashe withdrew his guarantee on the 14th of May by a letter of 4 lines. By the 1st week of June, the debt stood at £43,000, and the Duke of Wickham had discovered that he did not know how many keys there were on the housekeeper's ring, nor what a viewer was, nor which of the 4 Ravensgill pumps was the one that mattered, nor that the ventilation furnace at the Low Main had been maintained at his own charge since 1814, under a clause he had never read. Serena Harlow had the French paper hung. She also, in the same week, went through the colliery estimates with the Duke and struck out the item for the replacement of 140 lamp gauzes at 12 shillings each, because it came to £84 and the drawing room had come to 900, and something had to be found somewhere. The narrator sets that down here, plainly and out of order, because it is the whole of what happens at the end of this story, and it was decided in about 90 seconds in June by 2 people who did not know what they were looking at. There was a subscription assembly at Darlington on the 5th of June, and Helena Carr went to it, and she went because she had subscribed 4 guineas in January, and because she had worked out, sitting at Aldwych in May, that there would be exactly 1 evening on which the county would decide what she was, and that if she was not in the room for it, the decision would be made without her. She arrived at 9. She was still the Duchess of Wickham. Nothing in law had altered, and every woman in that room knew it, and 11 of them had eaten at her table. Nobody spoke to her for 50 minutes. That is a long time. It is longer than it sounds. She stood at the side of a room she had been the first lady of for 9 years, in a dark gown with her card empty, and watched the Countess of Harlow open the dancing on her husband's arm to a good deal of applause. And she did not leave, and she did not sit down, and twice she was obliged to step back to let couples pass, and both times the couples came through, as though the space she occupied were not occupied. At 10 o'clock the Duke of Denholm came in from the card-room, took in the whole geometry of it in about 4 seconds, and walked the entire length of that floor. The county watched him do it. He was a Duke of 38 with 11,000 acres and his own collieries. He had not danced since 1809, and was known not to. And he crossed 40 feet of boards in front of 200 people, and stopped in front of Helena Carr and bowed. "Madam, the next 2, if they are free. You know perfectly well they are free. Then I shall have them both, and the supper dance after. And you may tell me to go away in the middle of the second one if you find it does not answer." She put her hand on his arm because there was nothing else to be done with it, and they went down the set, and the room said what rooms say. "You have just cost yourself a great deal," she said on the turn. "I have cost myself nothing I valued." You have made me a woman a duke crossed a floor for, in the month my husband is telling everyone why he has put me aside, and you have done it in front of 200 witnesses, and you did not ask me first." Her chin was up. I would have said yes. That is not the point. The point is that you did what my husband does. Your Grace, you decided what would be good for me, and then you did it beautifully. The Duke of Denholm missed a step in the set. He had not missed a step in a dance since he was 14. You are quite right, he said. I beg your, do not. No, he recovered the figure. Very well. Then I will say this instead, and you may do what you like with it. I did not cross that floor to protect you. I crossed it because I have sat at a table with you 4 times a year since 1811, and I could not stand in a card room knowing you were standing alone in this one. That is not chivalry, madam. It is considerably more selfish, and I am not going to dress it as anything better. Helena did not answer him for the whole of the next figure. That, she said at last, is the first thing anybody has said to me since April that I believed. Helena, meanwhile, was at Aldwych with 11 rooms, 4 servants, 2,500 a year of jointure charged upon the Ravensgill lands, and nothing whatever to do for the first time since she was 20. She did not take it well, that is worth saying, because the county's version had her serene. Denholm rode over on the 11th of June and found her in the stable yard doing the accounts of a household of 4 on a plank across 2 barrels because she had not been able to make herself go into the room with a desk in it. You have come to be kind, she said, without looking up. Please do not. I have come because the quarterly inspection was not made in May, and Headley cannot get an answer out of Wickham. He got down. And because I have spent 2 months working out what to say to you, and I am going to say it badly, and you are going to dislike it. Then say it. You built the credit of that estate on your own name for 9 years, said the Duke of Denholm, and every man in 3 counties knew it, and not one of us ever said so out loud, because it was more comfortable to let Lucius Carr be thought a man of business. I have sat opposite you 4 times a year since 1811 and watched you hold up a house that was rotten, and I have said nothing, and I have known since about 1814 that when it came down, it would come down on you and not on him. He stopped. You were not a fool, madam. We were cowards. There is a difference, and the difference is entirely to your credit and entirely to my discredit, and I have not slept properly since April. Helena Carr set down her pen. For 9 years she had been told she was clever, which in that county was a way of saying unlovable, and she had been told she was managing, which was a way of saying grasping, and she had never once in her life been told the plain thing. Stop apologizing, she said. Her voice was not steady. You are not the one who wronged me. He is, and she is, and I am not going to spend an afternoon watching a decent man flog himself for a fault of manners in 1814. I have no use at all for your sleeplessness, your Grace. She stood up. Tell me what you intend to do about that furnace. Something moved across Denholm's face that she could not read at the time, and understood perfectly well 18 months later. I intend, he said, to go and look at it myself on Thursday. He came back from Ravensgill on Thursday with coal dust in the creases of his hands and a temper of a kind his own people had not seen in 9 years. The low main furnace had been drawn back. 2 of the 4 pumps were standing. The lamp store held 140 Davy lamps, of which perhaps 30 had sound gauzes, the rest being rusted through in the manner gauzes rust in a wet pit if they are not renewed twice a year. And Job Headley, the viewer, a Northumbrian of 60 who did not waste words, had put it to Denholm in 1 sentence at the pit head. There's fire damp in the low main to the height of a man's chest, your Grace, and by November it'll be to his boots, and I've wrote 3 times. And then, in the 2nd week of July, the Duke of Wickham did the thing that turned this from a story about money into a story about a woman's destruction. He filed an action at common law against Anthony Cray, Duke of Denholm, for criminal conversation with the plaintiff's wife, laying the damages at £20,000 to be tried at the Lincoln Assizes in the spring. It was not madness, it was arithmetic, and Serena Harlow had done it. Lucius Carr could not marry the Countess of Harlow while he had a wife, and there was exactly one road in England out of a marriage, a verdict in crim. Con, then a separation in the ecclesiastical court, then a private act, and the first stone of that road was a jury of 12 men finding that the Duchess of Wickham had been another man's mistress. It did not need to be true. It needed to be found. And it was, on the face of it, the easiest case in England to make. 7 years of meetings. 4 a year. 2 people alone in an estate office at 5 in the morning, with the door shut, testified to by every servant at Wickham. A neighbouring duke, who had ridden 11 miles before dawn to see a woman not his wife, in April, on the very morning she was put out of her house. Helena read the writ standing up in the hall at Aldwych, and had to put her hand on the newel post. Because the cruelty of it was this: a wife was not a party to a crim. Con, action, she could not be heard. She could not give evidence. 12 men would sit in a room at Lincoln and decide what she had been for 7 years, and she was not permitted to say one word to them. And the only mouth in England that could speak for her belonged to the man she was accused with. They built the defence at Aldwych through August and September out of paper. The Ravensgill Minute Book. The lease counterparts. The viewers' quarterly reports, initialed and dated. The bank's agent's own memoranda of every meeting, which Mr. Ord, to his eternal credit, produced without being asked, and offered to swear to. 7 years of business rendered down into a stack 11 inches high that said, in the flattest possible language, that these 2 people had spent their time together arguing about water. They worked at the long table in the room with the desk in it, which Helena had begun using in July. "There is a difficulty," Denholm said, one evening in late September, with the candles down to their last inch and Headley's report spread between them. "You have seen it. I have seen it since July." "Say it then." "I cannot." Helena put both hands flat on the table. "The defense is that there was nothing between us," she said. And there was nothing between us, not one word, not 1 hour, not one letter in 7 years that could not be read out in a church. She raised her eyes. "And if you and I are in this room at midnight in October, Your Grace, then everything in that stack becomes a lie that we assembled together, and the 12 men will be right, and I shall have handed my husband his verdict myself." The room was very quiet. 11 inches of paper lay between them on the table, which was about 2 feet, which had been getting smaller since June. "I know it," Denholm said. "Then you must not come again. Send Ord. Send Headley. Write to me about the pumps and nothing else, and sign it with your name and no other word, and I will do the same, and we will do it until the assizes are over." Her voice cracked precisely once, in the middle of the word assizes, and she went straight on through it. "And you will not say anything to me tonight, because if you say it now, I shall have to remember it every day between here and Lincoln, and I have not got room." He did not move for a moment. Neither did she. The candle nearest them guttered and went, and the room got smaller by the width of one flame, and Helena Carr found that she had put her hand down flat on the 11 inches of paper as though it might otherwise get up off the table. "There is a thing I have never told anybody," she said, "and I am going to tell you now because after tonight I shall not be able to. In 9 years my husband never once asked me a question about that estate. Not one. He signed where I put my finger. And I used to think that was trust, and I found out somewhere about 1815 that it was not trust, it was that he did not consider it interesting." Her voice was flat and entirely level, which was worse than weeping, and both of them knew it. "I have been the most useful woman in the north of England since I was 20 years old, Your Grace. And I have never in my life been asked what I thought about anything that was not a pump. Helena, so you will understand," she went on, "why I am going to send you out of this house in about 1 minute, and why it is the hardest thing I have ever done, and why I would very much rather you did not make it easy for me by being noble about it." Anthony Cray put his hand halfway across the table and stopped it there, 4 inches short of hers, in the way of a man who has decided something at the exact moment he was required not to act on it, and left it there for a full 3 seconds, and then took it back. "What do you think about the third heading?" he said. Unevenly, Helena Carr laughed, once, wrecked, with her eyes full, and it was the only time in 18 months that she did. "I think it wants a door," she said. Anthony Cray stood up and put on his coat and stopped at the door with his hand on it. "I have not said it," he said. "That is not the same as it's not being true, and I would rather you knew the difference." Then he went out into the September dark and did not come back to Aldwych for 5 months. Michaelmas at Wickham was the last of it, and Serena Harlow had staged it as a coronation. There were 60 people in the Great Hall on the 29th of September for the audit dinner, which had been the Duchess's dinner for 9 years, and was now, unmistakably, the Countess of Harlow's. And Helena came because she had been served with a summons to attend as a trustee of the Ravensgill settlement, which she was, and which Serena had not known when she permitted the summons to go out. She came in a plain dark gown, and she took the trustee's chair at the side table, and she said nothing for 40 minutes. Then Mr. Ord rose, and the coal factor's attorney rose, and the sheriff's officer, who had been standing at the back of that hall since 7 o'clock, and whom Serena had been told was a wine merchant, came forward, and the audit dinner at Wickham stopped being a dinner. The bank required the immediate renewal of the personal guarantee upon the Ravensgill account, in the sum of £18,000, or it would close it on the Saturday. The guarantee had stood in the name of Helena Carr since 1811. It required her signature, and hers alone, and every man in the room knew it, and the pen was already lying on the table in front of her. Lucius Carr looked down the hall at his wife. "Helena," he said, and Serena Harlow, who had been Countess of Harlow for 11 years and Mistress of Wickham for 5 months, made the single mistake that the county talked about for 30 years afterward. She turned in her chair, in front of 60 people, and said, in the voice one uses to a competent servant, "Well, sign it." Helena Carr stood up. "No," she said. She said it quietly, and she said it to the room and not to the woman, and she picked up the pen and laid it down again on the far side of the table, out of her own reach, which was a small thing and which 4 people afterwards said was the part they remembered. "I have kept this estate for 9 years," she said. "I have signed that guarantee every Michaelmas since 1811, and no one at this table has ever once said thank you for it, and I did not require thanks, so we will leave that. But you have asked me tonight, in front of the county, to put my name to £18,000 for a house I was put out of in April, in the 4th month of an action that names me an adulteress in open court, brought by the man who is asking, to make room for the woman who is telling me to sign." She looked at Serena Harlow for the first time since the 9th of April. "You wanted his title, madam. You have it. It comes with £43,000 of debt, a colliery that will kill men before Christmas, because you struck £84 of lamp gauzes off an estimate in June, and a husband who will find a way to blame you for both of it by Easter. I ran it for 9 years. You have had it for 5 months. Nobody in England is going to be able to say I did not leave it in good order." She took up her gloves. "I am not going to save you," she said, from having got exactly what you asked for. The narrator will not pretend this was a triumph, because Helena Carr paid for it before the week was out. £18,000 of guarantee were charged upon the Ravensgill lands, and so was her own jointure. And the closing of that account meant a receiver. And a receiver meant her £2,500 a year stopped on the 11th of October and did not start again for 19 months. And Serena Harlow, who was neither stupid nor slow, understood in that hall that she was not going to win by arithmetic, and moved to the only ground left to her. She found the maid. Her name was Dorcas Sill. She had been at Wickham since 1816. She was paid 40 guineas, and she swore an affidavit in the second week of October that she had twice carried letters from her mistress to the Duke of Denholm, and had once been sent out of the estate office and told to shut the door. The last was true. That was the strength of it. Every servant at Wickham could swear to the shut door. The county turned in a fortnight. The Ashe cousins in Newcastle stopped writing. Her own brother Marcus, who had a bank to think of, wrote to say that he must be understood as taking no side, which is what a man writes when he has taken one. Aldwych had no visitors between the middle of October and the end of the month, and Helena Carr sat in 11 cold rooms with no income, no defence she was allowed to make, and 5 months to wait for 12 men in Lincoln to say what she had been. She wrote to Denholm once in that time. 2 lines, the gauzes were never renewed. Whatever else happens, do not let them go into the Low Main. She signed it with her name and no other word. He carried it in his coat for the next 4 years. They came for her at Aldwych at 4 in the morning on the 2nd of November. It was Job Headley himself on a borrowed horse, hammering on the door with the flat of his hand, and what he said when she opened it was, "Ma'am, the Low Main's fired, and there's 49 men down, and the furnace has been drawn back a fortnight, and there's not a soul at that pit head who knows the workings but you." Helena Carr was in the yard in 4 minutes, with her hair down her back. The narrator has heard 3 versions of what happened at Ravensgill that morning, and sets down only what was afterwards sworn to at the inquest by 11 witnesses. That the Duchess of Wickham arrived at the pithead at 5:20 in a gig, in the dark, in front of perhaps 400 people from 3 villages, that she took the plans off the wall of the viewer's office and put them on the ground and knelt on them, that she ordered the furnace relit at the upcast, and the doors in the 3rd and 7th headings shut in a sequence she gave from memory, which reversed the ventilation and drove the afterdamp away from the 11 men trapped behind the fall at the far end of the Low Main, rather than onto them. That she went down the shaft herself at 6:30 with Job Headley and 4 hewers, carrying one of the 30-sound Davy lamps, because she was the only person above ground who knew that the 1814 workings connected to the bell drift, and that there was therefore a second way in, and that they brought out all 11. 47 men came out of Ravensgill pit that morning. 2 did not. One was a hewer named William Aske, aged 19, and there is nothing to be said about that except his name. The other was Lucius Carr, 4th Duke of Wickham, who had come down to the pithead at 6 o'clock, because the whole county was there and it was his colliery, and he had understood, at last and far too late, that a man must be seen to do something, and who went in at the drift mouth alone, against Headley's shouted order, and turned the wrong way at the second junction, because he had never in his life been down his own pit, and who was found on the 4th of November 11 yards, from a door he could have opened if he had known it was a door. He had gone in with an unsound lamp. There were 30 good ones on the table at the drift mouth, and 110 bad, and he had taken the one nearest his hand, because he did not know there was a difference. Serena Harlow left the county before the inquest. The Crim. Con. Action abated on the plaintiff's death, and was never tried, and the 12 men at Lincoln never sat, and Dorcas Sill's affidavit was read out at the inquest by Helena's own counsel, for the sole purpose of asking the maid, on oath, in front of the coroner and 400 people from 3 villages, whether she had ever in her life seen a letter, and having her say no. The Countess of Harlow was received nowhere in the north of England after the March of 1819. She married in 1822 a man from Bristol with a great deal of money and a reputation of his own, and she was, by every account that reached Durham, extremely unhappy, and she never once in the remaining 30 years of her life spoke the name of Helena Carr aloud. The estate went to a cousin in Shropshire and came out of the receiver's hands in 1821, considerably smaller, and on a bright cold morning in the October of 1820, in the church at Ravensgill, with Job Headley giving her away because there was nobody else she would have asked, Helena Carr married the Duke of Denholm, 23 months and 11 days after her husband's funeral, which the county said was indecently soon, and which she said, to the one person who put it to her face, was 23 months and 11 days longer than she had wanted to wait. He said his piece to her at last on the night before, in the garden at Aldwick, having held it since September of 1818. I have had 2 years to improve it, he said, and it has not improved. It is this: I have never in my life wanted to be needed by you. I have wanted to be the one man in England who did not require you to be useful before he thought you were worth the room. That is the whole of it. I am aware it is not poetry. It is better than poetry, said Helena. It is accurate. And she crossed the 2 feet of gravel herself, which is a thing worth recording, because for 9 years nobody had let her cross anything. Their son was born in the autumn of 1821, and their daughter in 1823. And the daughter was called Alice, for no reason connected with this story at all, which is how the best names are chosen. The Ravensgill workings passed under Denholm's sole lease in 1821, and the ventilation furnace was maintained at his charge and inspected quarterly, and there was not another firing in that pit for 31 years. Job Headley remained viewer until 1834, and was buried in the churchyard at Ravensgill under a stone the Duchess paid for, and refused to have inscribed with anything but his name and his trade. On the wall beside the door at Denholm, at the height of a man's hand, on an iron hook driven into the stone for the purpose, hung a Davy lamp with a sound gauze and a blackened glass, one of the 30, the one she had carried down at 6:30 on the 2nd of November, 1818. Visitors asked about it for 40 years. The Duchess of Denholm gave the same answer every time, and it was not the story, and the servants used to wait for it. It is a lamp you can take into bad air, she would say, and it will not set the place alight. There are not many things you can say that of. Then she would go back to whatever she had been doing, which was, generally, the accounts.